One of the most sadistic concentration camp commanders in Poland was Salomon Morel, a depraved man who took pleasure in torturing, raping, and killing prisoners. After the fall of communism, he fled to Israel and was protected from extradition. This is his story. A warning, the video includes very disturbing subject matter. Salomon, or Shlomo, was born to a poor family in Garbów, Poland. Salomon was 20 years old when the war broke out. There are conflicting narratives about his wartime activities. Salomon himself claimed to be a survivor of Auschwitz, but this was not true. Another version, published by the Institute of National Remembrance, states that Salomon and his brother organized a criminal band that robbed local people. Their criminal activity ended when during one of the robberies they were captured by members of a Polish People's Army. To avoid punishment, Morel placed all the blame on his brother, who was executed, and then he later joined the communist partisans. He then worked mostly doing janitorial duties and peeling potatoes. Either way, in August of 1944, as Soviet tanks liberated Lublin, he joined the Office of Public Security. Morel was hired as a guard in the infamous prison inside Lublin Castle, where members of the Polish Home Army were being tortured. He was formally appointed as a guard on November 9, 1944. On November 30th, his commanding officer wrote that 6 guards, including Morel, were a harmful element in the prison administration because they did not perform their duties conscientiously, they did not attempt to comply with prison regulations, and behave arrogantly, whereby they sow rumors about me, as a result which they make my work difficult and undermine my authority." End quote. Despite this, somehow Morel quickly rose among the ranks. On February 15, 1945, he was appointed the commander of a concentration camp in Upper Silesia. KL Einschreitstuhl was a subcamp of Auschwitz, located in a densely populated central industrial area of Silesia, only a few kilometers from the pre-war border and the major Polish city of Katowice. The Germans converted a nearby factory that pre-war made mining equipment into a munitions plant that used forced labor. The Germans evacuated the camp and abandoned it intact on January 23, 1945, leaving behind the barbed wire, watchtower, prisoner barracks, and guard accommodation. The camp did not remain empty for long. Approximately 6,000 people were imprisoned at the newly renamed Skoda camp. Most of the prisoners were Silesians. About a third were ethnic Germans. At least 1,855 prisoners died in the camp during its 8-month operation. Now, some background on Silesians. For many centuries, they have been strongly influenced by German culture, and their dialect have many German influences. For various reasons, the Germans forced many people in Upper Silesia to sign the Volkslied, many unwillingly. The majority of actual German collaborators had fled prior to the arrival of the Soviets. The communists had tried to convince the local population that only Nazis were in the camp. In reality, anyone could have found themselves sent to the camp, and many were sent there for opposing the communist regime, or simply having something that the communists wanted to steal from them. One survivor described Morel as a barbaric and cruel man who often personally tortured and killed prisoners. Another, a local Upper Silesian of Polish descent, was imprisoned when he was 14 years old and wrote a book about his experiences, detailing the endemic torture and abuses in the camp. Some allegations are well documented, some are not. For the Germans especially, it was hell on earth. As men like Morel exacted revenge on them. We know the minimum amount of people who died of camp due to their death certificates, and there are also numerous mass graves located at the site. In November 1945, all prisoners were released. However, they first had to sign an oath, under penalty of prison, to never disclose the events witnessed in the camp. For years, the history of the camp lived exclusively in the memories of the former prisoners and their families, carefully hidden for fear of repercussion for revealing how the native people of Silesia were treated. In 1993, John Sachs published a book called An Eye for an Eye, the untold story of seeking revenge against Germans in 1945, detailing the story from the camp. Sachs had actually interviewed Morel. They had met at the Katowice headquarters of the Jewish Social and Cultural Society. Sachs came to Silesia from the States in 1989. He heard about Morel from his former lover, Lola Potok, who, like Morel, was employed in the Ministry of Public Security and was the director of a prison in Silesia. During his meeting with Salomon, Zach got Salomon to confide in him. He told him more about his life than anyone else. Zach wrote all of it in his book. Morel tried to convince Zach not to write about him. In 1995, the book was banned in Germany. I haven't been able to find many details about this banning. If anyone knows, what is the punishment for owning this book? How was this ban enacted? Was it voted on? Please put in the comment section. After the Skoda camp closed, Morel was the commander of other concentration camps and prisons. By the late 1940s, he earned a reputation in Poland of an exceptional sadist. From 1949 to 1951, Morel was the commander of Jaworzno concentration camp. This also used to be a sub-camp of Auschwitz. However, with an experiment by the Soviets, it housed teenagers. It was for adolescents. For the crime of handing out anti-communist leaflets, you would get 7 years. Anti-communist graffiti, 10 years. Usually, immediately upon their detention, young opponents of the Soviet system were subjected to many weeks of torture, aimed at extorting a testimony, but also a mental breakdown. Typical methods were beatings, kicking all over body with boots, gagging the mouth and pouring water in the nose, sticking a stool in the rectum, and so on. Perhaps one of the most common methods of torture was confining prisoners in basements filled to the waist with water. They were left there for several days. Several people drowned. They also encouraged bullying. After all, these were young children, were forced to wear German uniforms. Of one of the former officers of the Ministry of Public Security involved in work at the camp admitted, they were to be our subjects, informers, ready to sell their relatives and friends under the influence of fear. After years of training in the camp, sent to the cities, they were to create legions of hooligans, thus strengthening security offices. In 1964, he defended his master's degree with a thesis on the economic value of forced labor at Wrocław University Law School. Morel was awarded many honors by the communist government. However, in 1968, everything changed. In the Polish Communist Party, there had been a slow seizure of power from the faction Morel was a part of to another faction. While many of his comrades fled at the time, he stayed in Poland. After the fall of communism in Poland, the Polish government started prosecuting people accused of communist crimes. Morel fled to Israel. In 1996, Salomon Morel was formally indicted of genocide by the Polish Public Prosecutor's Office. Poland filed for extradition in 1998. The prosecutor managed to get almost 100 witnesses to testify about what they had seen in the camp. Israel refused, stating that the statute of limitations had expired. He died in Tel Aviv in 2007. There are other stories like this. This is something that not a lot of people outside of Poland know about. Even many people in Poland don't know about this. Thank you for listening. Do widzenia.